The grand arena of the Allied races hummed with the noise of 30,000 beings. From 100 star systems, they had come to witness another demonstration of perfection, another flawless victory by the warrior who had never been touched. High above the circular combat floor, floating platforms held dignitaries, military attachés, and the wealthy elite, who wagered enormous sums on how quickly the bout would end. Nobody bet on whether the champion would win. That was considered a waste of credits. Torvin Val stood at the center of the sand-covered floor, his forearms folded. Across his broad chest, he was Viakin, a species that towered over most humanoids, covered in a fine mesh of bronze scales that caught the arena. Lights like polished armor. His tail, thick and whipcord strong, swayed slowly. Behind him, his face was expressionless, eyes the color of molten gold, observing the tunnel entrance where his opponent would emerge. The champion had dispatched 83 challengers in his career. Not one had landed a single blow. His danger sense, a low-level psionic gift, unique to his bloodline, allowed him to perceive hostile intent milliseconds before it became motion. It was not true precognition, but it might as well have been. He was, for all practical purposes, untouchable. The tunnel doors irised open, and Jace Harlan walked out. He was not what the crowd expected, where previous challengers had been massive Zoltic brutes or sleek Drevar blade masters. The human was of average height, clad in a simple gray combat tunic and trousers. No ceremonial armor, no energy shields. He was built like a distance runner, lean muscle, compact frame, watchful eyes that swept the arena with the calm assessment of someone who had been in bad places before and walked out. His dark hair was cropped short, and a faded scar traced his jawline. The audience's initial murmur gave way to dismissive laughter. This was the species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. This fragile-looking creature was going to face Torvin Val, the mediator, an elderly Thalian with pale blue skin and ceremonial robes, raised a crystalline staff. The crowd, quieted by tradition, the staff would be struck against the floor 3 times to signify the commencement of honorable combat. Before the first strike, both combatants were expected to remain stationary, allowing the audience to appreciate the gravity of the moment. Torvin Val regarded the human with detached curiosity. He noted the steady heartbeat, slower than he would have expected. No trembling, no scent of fear. Pheromones. The human simply stood, their hands loose at his sides, watching the mediator's staff with an almost analytical focus. Honored guests, noble warriors, the Thalian intoned. We gather to witness a contest of martial skill between the esteemed champion Torvin Val of the Viakin Dominion and the representative of the Terran Accord, Jace Harlan. Let the record show. Jace Harlan moved. It happened so fast that the Thalian's next syllable never left his throat. The human closed the distance in a silent, explosive rush. His right fist drove into Torvin's jaw with a crack that echoed through the arena sound system. Before the champion's nervous system could process the impact, Jace's left knee buried itself in his midsection, folding scales and forcing air from his lungs. An elbow followed, smashing into the side of his temple, making his vision stutter. A low kick swept his supporting leg, and As the massive VI Arabic Farsi Ye Arabic Kaf Arabic Noon began to tilt, final punch hammered into his kidney. From behind, 5 hits, each one landed with mechanical precision, each one drove shockwaves through flesh that had never known the insult of a strike. Torvin's mind reeled, pain and alien sensation almost forgot blazed through his body. His danger sense had not triggered because by the strict traditions of his people, the fight had not yet begun, the staff had not struck. The floor combat was impossible, yet here he was stumbling sideways, one hand instinctively clutching his ribs, his jaw screaming with a deep throbbing ache. The arena fell into absolute silence. The Thalian mediator stood frozen, staff still raised, mouth open. Jay stepped back, resetting his stance, breathing evenly. He had not thrown those strikes with lethal intent. They were disabling blows, meant to shock and disorient. He wiped a trace of blood from his knuckles, the champion's blood, and waited. On the floating platforms, the VI Arabic Farsi Ye Arabic Kaf Arabic Noon delegation shot to their feet, shouts of outrage and accusations of dishonor filled the air. Other species stared, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The undefeated champion had been struck not once, 5 times, before anyone even realized the fight had begun. Torvin Val straightened slowly, golden eyes now burning with something that had never been there before, genuine, incandescent rage. The pain cleared the fog in his head, and a single coherent thought crystallized. He had been hit. The human had attacked before the sacred signal, violating every protocol, and now this small, fragile creature would learn what happened when Torvin Val actually fought back. He lowered his hands, his tail lashed the air. The sound that rumbled from his chest was not words, it was a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the sand. The mediator scrambled backward, suddenly aware that the rules no longer applied. Jace met the champion's glare without flinching. He flexed his fingers and settled into a combat stance. Torvinville charged. Part 2. 12 hours earlier, Jace Harlan had sat in a cramped briefing room aboard the Terran diplomatic vessel Resolute, listening to an intelligence officer break down everything humanity knew about Viking combat traditions. The holographic display showed Torvinville's previous bouts, 83 victories, each one a masterclass, evasive perfection. Opponents swung blades, fired projectiles, launched themselves with augmented speed, and not one had ever connected. He has a precognitive danger sense, the analyst explained. It's not magic. It's a biological adaptation. Viking high-caste warriors can detect hostile intent just before it translates into action. They feel the threat coming in. Their bodies react before the attack launches. Against a Viking of Val's caliber, you can't win by being faster. You have to hit him before he knows he's in danger. Jace had studied the combat footage carefully. He noticed something no one else had flagged. Every bout began with the same ritual. The mediator would strike the floor 3 times with a staff, only then would the Vikings posture shift into a fighting stance. Before those strikes, Torvinville stood relaxed, almost bored. His danger sense was dormant because he did not perceive the pre-signal period as combat time. The fight in his mind did not exist until tradition said it did. He's never been hit because he's never had to defend himself during the invocation, Jace said, no one has ever attacked him before the signal. The intelligence officer hesitated. That would be considered a violation of the duel's code. The allied races would call it dishonorable. Earth could face diplomatic repercussions. Jace leaned back. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to make sure humanity isn't dismissed as a weak, backward species that can be pushed around in trade negotiations. If their rules let a champion stand untouchable for decades, those rules were designed to protect him. I'm not playing by a rigged system, the ambassador had argued, but the decision was made. Humanity's introduction to the galactic stage would not be defined by polite submission to a stacked deck. Jace Harlan would fight his own way. Now in the arena, the consequences of that choice were bearing down on him. With 4 arms and a tail, Torvin Val's charge was not the wild rush of an enraged brute. Even through fury, his movement was controlled, terrifyingly fluid. He covered 10 m in the time it took Jace to exhale. The first punch came from his upper right arm, a straight piston drive aimed at Jace's chest with enough force to shatter concrete. Jace pivoted, feeling the wind of the strike pass his ribs. The second punch from the lower left was already sweeping toward his legs, aiming to break his stance. Jace leaped, tucking his knees, and landed on the balls of his feet 2 m away. The champion was a storm of limbs. Each attack flowed into the next, a rhythm perfected over thousands of hours of training. Torvin's danger sense was fully engaged now, feeding him data on Jace's intentions. The human's every twitch, every shift of weight was telegraphed to the V-Kid's nervous system. Jace could see it happening the way Torrin's blocks arrived before his strikes, the way his counters interrupted Jace's combinations. Mid-flow, fighting him head-on was like trying to punch the wind. So Jace changed tactics. He stopped thinking about hitting Torrin and started thinking about forcing mistakes. He retreated toward one of the massive stone pillars that ringed the arena floor, using it to break Torrin's line of sight for fractions of a second. Each time the champion had to adjust his angle, his strikes lost a sliver of precision. Jace ducked, weaved, absorbed a glancing backhand that rattled his teeth and sent him stumbling. He kept moving. Another blow caught his shoulder, numbing his left arm instantly. The crowd gasped. They thought it was over. Jace used the momentum of that hit to spin into a low sweep. His leg connected with Torrin's ankle, and for an instant, the champion's balance wavered. It wasn't a damaging blow, but it was proof the untouchable warrior could be made to stumble. The human scrambled back to his feet, shaking out his deadened arm, refusing to go down. The V-Kid delegation had stopped screaming about dishonor. They were watching now, silent and intent, as the human they had dismissed as a joke turned the duel into an actual contest. Torrin's molten eyes tracked Jace with a new intensity. Anger was still there, but something else was creeping in. Respect, curiosity, it was hard to tell. Through the adrenaline, the champion advanced again, slower this time. He was adapting no longer throwing wild combinations. He was treating Jace as a threat. The 4 arms spread wide, cutting off escape routes. The tail slithered low, ready to entangle. Torvin was done playing. Jace's back hit the pillar, solid stone. No more room to retreat. Torvin's massive form blocked the light, casting the human in shadow. The champion's Upper arms reached forward to seize, while the lower arms chambered for devastating body blows, a trap. Perfectly executed. You struck me before the signal. Torvin rumbled, his voice deep and resonant, clever, but it will not save. You. Jace looked up at the towering warrior. Breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow, he didn't answer with words. Instead, his eyes flicked downward for a split second, a deliberate signal of intent that his conscious mind pushed into the open. Torvin's danger sense caught it and reacted, his body shifting to block a low attack that never came. Instead, Jace's real move came from the side. His right hand, the one he had kept pressed against the pillar, was now closed around a fistful of coarse sand. He had scooped from the floor, he flung it directly into Torvin's eyes. The champion roared momentarily. Blinded, his attack faltered. Jace dropped and rolled under the sweeping arms coming up behind him. For a single glorious heartbeat, the human had the champion's undefended back. The crowd roared. Part 3. Sand in the eyes was a dirty trick, and Jace knew it, but dirty tricks kept you alive when the alternative was a shattered ribcage. He didn't waste the opening. As Torvin's hands went to his face, Jace drove a sharp kick into the back of the champion's knee, buckling the joint. The Vikun went down to one leg, his tail lashing blindly. Jace was already circling, targeting the lower left shoulder with a rapid series of punches, not wild swings but precise strikes aimed at the nerve bundle his briefing had identified from anatomical scans. The muscle beneath the bronze scales spasmed and the arm went limp. Torvin bellowed more from shock than pain. One of his 4 weapons was offline. He blinked away the grit and focused on Jace with a glare that could have melted steel. You fight without honor, he growled, rising despite the numbed limb. I fight to win, Jace replied, his voice steady. Your honor was a cage you built for your opponents. I'm not stepping into it. Something shifted in the champion's expression. The words had landed deeper than any physical blow could. For decades, Torvin Val had been the galaxy's paragon of martial virtue, but that virtue had been propped up by rituals that guaranteed his advantage. The human had peeled back that curtain, and the audience was seeing the truth. For the first time, they came together again, and now the fight was brutal. Torvin compensated for his dead arm, rotating his torso to bring his remaining 3 limbs into play. His strikes were heavier, slower, but each one carried the weight of wounded pride. Jace dodged a cross that would have broken his neck, slid under a tail sweep, and popped back up to plant an elbow strike into Torvin's ribs. The scales there were already bruised from the initial ambush, and the champion grunted, staggering. But Jace was taking damage too. A hammering blow from the lower right arm caught him in the side, and he felt something crack, a rib probably. The pain was a white-hot flare that stole his breath. He stumbled, and Torvin was on him instantly, grabbing his tunic and lifting him off the ground. Champion's face was inches away, golden, eyes blazing. It ends now, Torvin hissed. He threw Jace across the arena floor. The human hit the sand hard, rolling, spitting blood. The crowd was on its feet, a cacophony of alien voices, shouting in a dozen languages. Vilken delegation pounded their platform railings. The Terran ambassador watched with white knuckles, Jace pushed himself up, coughing, one hand pressed against his injured ribs. His vision swam, but he could see Torin approaching, no longer rushing but stalking with the measured tread of a predator who knew his prey was finished. Jace forced himself to think through the haze. The champion was down, one arm favoring his left leg where the knee strike had landed, and his breathing was heavy. The pain Jace had inflicted was cumulative, dragging down the Viking stamina, but Torin still had strength enough to end this in a single clean combination. Jace needed a different angle, something Torin's danger scent couldn't anticipate. He spotted it, a broken piece of the stone floor, jagged and roughly triangular, lying near the pillar they had fought earlier. A piece had cracked loose during one of Torin's missed strikes. It wasn't a weapon, not really, but it was a variable. Jace scrambled for it. Torin saw the movement and lunged, trying to intercept, but Jace's hand closed around the stone shard, and instead of throwing it or slashing, he did something unexpected. He hurled it high into the air above Torin's head. The champion's danger sense flared. Threat from above. Instinctively his eyes flicked upward, his arms rising to guard against a descending projectile. That split-second distraction was all Jace needed. He launched himself forward, not at Torin's torso, but at the vulnerable knee he had already damaged. A two-footed slide tackle, both boots slamming into the side of the joint with every ounce of his remaining strength. The crack was sickening. Torin's leg buckled and he went down hard, the impact shaking the arena floor. The stone shard clattered harmlessly to the sand beside him. The champion tried to rise, but his leg would not support his weight. He collapsed onto his side, breathing in ragged gasps, his three working arms splayed across the sand. The arena was pandemonium. The mediator rushed forward, staff clattering against the floor once, twice, three times, belatedly signaling the end of the bout. But the fight had already moved beyond the reach of ritual. Jace Harlan stood over Torin Val, bloodied, broken-ribbed, swaying on his feet. He didn't raise his fists, he just looked down at the fallen champion and waited. Torin glared up at him, pain and fury warring on his scaled features. His hand moved to his wrist gauntlet, and Jace saw the flicker of a hidden mechanism. Thin seam split open along the forearm, and a blade of shimmering blue energy extended with a low hum. The crowd's roar turned to a collective intake of breath. Concealed weapons were forbidden in sanctioned duels. This was a violation that carried permanent exile from the allied race's martial institutions. But the Viking delegation did nothing. The mediator stood frozen, unwilling to challenge the Dominion's champion. The rules, it seemed, only mattered when they protected the powerful. Jace watched the energy blade carve a hissing arc through the air as Torin pushed himself upright on his uninjured knee. The champion's expression was desperate, hollowed out by humiliation. He was about to murder a defenseless opponent on live broadcast, and some part of him knew he would never recover from it. The blade swung. Part 4. The shimmering edge came for Jace's throat, and instinct took over. Years of special operations training, close quarters combat, improvised weaponry, surviving when the odds said you shouldn't, kicked in before conscious thought. Jace dropped backward, arching his spine, and the blade passed close enough to shave the fabric of his tunic. he hit. The sand on his shoulders rolled and came up with the stone shard in his hand, not a weapon but a tool. Torvin lunged again, energy blade humming, his movement sloppy with rage and pain. The champion was a warrior bred for formal combat, not a desperate knife fight in the dirt. The blade was a crutch he didn't know how to use properly. Jace sidestepped the thrust, slapped the flat of the shard against the gauntlet housing and twisted. The mechanism sparked and shorted. The energy blade flickered and died. In the same fluid motion, Jace hooked his leg behind Torvin's good knee, toppling the massive Vic onto his back. The arena fell into a hush so complete that Jace could hear his own labored breathing. He stood over the champion, the useless gauntlet smoking, the shard discarded. Torvin's golden eyes stared upward, no longer angry, just empty. The undefeated warrior lay defeated, his illegal weapon destroyed, his body broken, his reputation in ruins. Jace looked at the mediator. Call it. The Thalian's mouth worked silently. He glanced at the Vic delegation, seeking guidance, but they frozen, caught between outrage and dawning horror at what their champion had attempted. The crowd began to chant, a rumbling rhythm of stamping feet and alien voices that didn't need translation. They wanted the human to be acknowledged. Yield, Jace said to Torvin quietly, enough that the broadcast microphones barely caught it. The champion's chest heaved. For a long moment, the two of them existed in a bubble of silence inside the roaring arena. Then Torvin's eyes closed and his head fell back against the sand. I yield. The words were a thunderclap. The mediator finally struck his staff 3 times, officially ending the bout. Jace Harlan had won. Viakin security forces poured onto the arena floor, their weapons raised. The human had humiliated their champion, exposed their corruption, and shattered a legacy. They would arrest him, drag him away, and the diplomatic consequences could be managed later. Torvin's voice cut through their advance. Stop, the champion forced himself upright, propped on his 3 working arms, his broken legs stretched uselessly. Before him, the security squad halted. Confused, he won by the code. I yielded. There is no dishonor in his victory, only in my response to it. The lead security officer, a younger Viakin with a crested helm, hesitated. Torvin Val's words still carried weight even now. Slowly the weapons lowered. Jace didn't relax. He kept his eyes on the security team as he stepped back, giving himself space. The Terran ambassador was already pushing through the chaos, flanked by 2 human Marines in dress uniforms. Behind them, a medical team rushed forward with a hover stretcher. Jace finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of his injuries, the cracked rib, the bruised shoulder, the dozen lacerations that leaked blood into his tunic. His vision swam and he went down on one knee. Easy, Lieutenant, the ambassador said, catching his arm. You did it. I don't know how, but you did it. Told you, Jace muttered, wincing. Fight my own way. The medical team loaded him onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, he caught Torvin's eye across the sand. Champion was being treated by his own medics, his leg being stabilized, his expression unreadable. But before Jace was carried out of the arena, Torvin inclined his head, a small, deliberate nod, not submission, acknowledgement. The infirmary aboard the Resolute was quiet, sterile, and blissfully painless. Once the analgesics kicked in, Jace lay on a recovery bed, his rib knitted by a bone knitter, his wounds sealed with dermal adhesive. He was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying the fight, the 5 hits, the desperate scramble, the energy blade humming toward his throat. The door chimed. The ambassador entered, her expression a mix of relief and anxiety. "You have a visitor," he insisted. Given the political situation, I couldn't refuse. Before Jace could ask, Torvin Val was wheeled in on a medical chair, his leg encased in a regeneration cast, his dead arm slowly regaining mobility thanks to Viacan medical technology. He looked diminished outside the arena, mortal tired, his bronze scales dulled, but his golden eyes were as sharp as ever. "Leave us," Torvin said to his attendants. The ambassador hesitated, then nodded and stepped outside. The 2 warriors regarded each other. Across the room, the silence stretched. 83 challengers, Torvin said finally. From 37 species, some were faster than you, most were stronger, not one ever touched me. "I know," Jace said. "Do you know why?" Torvin leaned forward, his voice low. "My bloodline carries a gift. We sense hostile intent. We feel the shape of an attack before the muscles move. It is not perfect, but against a single opponent in formal combat, it is enough to make us untouchable. No one had ever hit me because I always knew the blow was coming." Jay stayed quiet. "But you struck before the signal," Torvin continued. "Before I perceived the fight as real, my mind did not register the possibility of attack, so my senses did not warn me. You bypassed the gift entirely, and by the time I understood, you had already landed 5 blows. Do you understand what that means, human? It means your tradition had a blind spot," Jay said. "It means my people have been fighting the same way for 1,000 years, and no one ever thought to question it. Until you." Torvin's gaze was intense. "I want to learn, not your techniques, your way of thinking, the way you see rules as variables instead of walls. Will you teach me?" The request was so unexpected that Jace almost laughed. The champion who had tried to kill him with an illegal blade was now asking for lessons, but there was no duplicity in Torvin's eyes, just the painful honesty of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. Before Jace could answer, the ship's intercom crackled. "Ambassador to the bridge, Priority 1 alert from Allied Races Command. Krell swarm forces have breached the Deneb sector. Multiple colonies under attack. All available combat vessels are requested to rally at Point Theta." The Krell swarm, the nightmare that haunted the galaxy's edge, a species of relentless adaptive predators that consumed everything in their path. The Allied races had held them at bay for centuries, but a full breach meant disaster. Torvin's expression hardened. "The Dominion will answer, but our fleet is configured for conventional warfare. The Krell are anything but conventional." He looked at Jace. "We need someone who thinks differently." Part 5. The infirmary door slid open again, and the ambassador re-entered, her face pale. "We just received a direct request from the Viacan Dominion High Command. They're mobilizing their 3rd Fleet and requesting Terran tactical support. Specifically, they're asking for Lieutenant Harlan." She looked between Jace and Torvin. "Apparently your fight made an impression." Jace pushed himself upright, ignoring the protest from his healing rib. What kind of tactical support? The Krell swarm doesn't fight like a conventional enemy, the ambassador explained. They adapt mid-battle. Tactics that work once fail the second time. The allied races have been using the same defensive formations for decades, and the Krell have finally learned to counter them. Command thinks. They think a human perspective might be the variable the swarm hasn't encountered. They want me to help plan a fleet engagement. They want you to think the way you fought, Torvin interjected, unpredictably, without respect for comfortable traditions. The champion's voice carried a strange mix of bitterness and hope. I spent my life believing I was invincible because the rules said so. The Krell don't have rules, neither do you apparently. The ambassador folded her arms. It's voluntary, Lieutenant, but if you succeed, it will cement humanity's position in the allied races faster than any diplomatic treaty. If you fail, she didn't finish. Jace swung his legs off the bed. I'll need access to all tactical data on the Krell, their swarm behavior, previous engagements, what's worked and what hasn't, and I'll need a direct line to the Viakin fleet commander. Torin nodded. I will ensure you have it. 12 hours later, Jace Harlan stood on the command deck of the Viakin cruiser Iron Resolve, surrounded by towering reptilian officers who regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. News of the arena duel had spread through the fleet. Everyone knew this was the human who had struck the untouchable champion 5 times. Some saw him as a dishonorable trickster, others as a revelation. Fleet Commander Vas Khan, a grizzled Viakin with battle scars that traced across half his face, gestured at the holographic display. It showed the Deneb sector, a cluster of 15 star systems, 3 of which were already burning. Krell swarm tendrils moved through the sector like oil spreading through water. Conventional doctrine says we establish a defensive line at the Karthus Nebula. Vas Khan rumbled. The nebula disrupts Krell's sensory organs. We've held them there before. Jay studied the display. How many times? 4 engagements over the past century. And they've never broken through. Not at Karthus, no. Vas Khan's tail twitched. Why? Because it's a trap, Jay said. He pointed at the swarm movements. Look at how they're flowing. They're not spreading randomly, they're funneling. Every colony they hit is pushing civilian refugees toward the Cardais corridor. They want you to form that defensive line. They fought you there 4 times. They've had a century to study the nebula's effects on their biology. I guarantee they've adapted. The tactical officers exchanged uneasy glances. Torvin Val, seated in a support chair with his legs still healing, watched intently. What do you propose? Vaskin asked. You don't meet them at the line. You let them commit to the nebula thinking you're there, then you hit them from behind. Jace zoomed the display, highlighting a region of empty space. Here, the Marak Void. No colonies, no strategic value. It's the last place they'd expect a fleet. You split your forces. One group makes noise at Cardais, draws the swarm in. The other group slingshots around the void and hits their rear flank when they're fully engaged. A decoy maneuver, Vaskin said slowly. Risky. The force at Cardais would be outnumbered. They don't have to win, they just have to survive long enough for the hammer to Fall, use hit-and-run tactics. Don't. Hold the line, make them chase you. Krell swarms are aggressive but predictable when they think they're winning. Keep them chasing shadows until the main force is in position. The commander studied the display for a long moment, then he turned to Jace, his golden eyes unreadable. You think like a predator who does not care about the opinion of prey. That is unsettling and valuable. He nodded to his officers. Make it so, the humans' plan. The fleet split, the Cardai's decoy force, led by the Iron Resolve itself, moved into position with all the theatrical fanfare the V-Kins could muster, broadcasting challenge signals, lighting up sensor networks, making themselves impossible to miss. Jace stayed aboard the Iron Resolve, standing at Vascon's side as the first Krell tendrils entered the nebula. The swarm was horrifying, not ships but living organisms, massive chitin-plated leviathans that moved through space on rippling waves of organic thrust. Each one carried thousands of smaller fighters, symbiotic drones that could strip a cruiser's hull in minutes. They flowed into the nebula in a tide of alien hunger, and the decoy force engaged. Hit and fade, Jace reminded. Don't let them pin you. The V-Kin ships darted through the nebulous clouds, firing volleys in, retreating before the swarm could swarm. It went against every V-Kin instinct for honorable battle, but they did it. The Krell pursued, growing bolder, spreading their formation to engulf the fleeing ships. Then the hammer fell. The main V-Kin force, having looped around the Merak void, slammed into the Krell's exposed rear. Torpedoes and energy lances tore through the organic hulls. The swarm's cohesion shattered. The leviathans, designed to overwhelm fixed defenses, found themselves caught between two jaws. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Deneb sector was clear and the Krell swarm had suffered its first decisive defeat. 200 years. Part 6. The victory broadcast spread across the Allied races faster than light. Holographic news feeds showed V-Kin cruisers returning to port, their hulls scarred but their crews triumphant, and at the center of every report was a single image: Fleet Commander Vascon standing beside the human tactician Jace Harlan, both of them addressing the Council of Allied Races from the deck of the Iron Resolve. Torvin Val watched the broadcast from a rehabilitation chamber aboard his personal vessel. His leg was nearly healed, the regeneration cast having done its work. His arm was functional again, though still weak, but his body was not what troubled him. His mind kept circling the same thought, a splinter he couldn't extract. The human had beaten him, not because he was stronger or faster, but because he thought outside the frame. And then, when given a fleet, he had applied that same thinking to an enemy that had confounded the galaxy's best military minds for centuries. What else had humanity been quietly learning while the Allied races clung to their traditions? A chime announced a visitor. Jace Harlan entered, wearing a Terran naval uniform now, the rank insignia freshly updated. He looked tired but alert, the way soldiers did after the adrenaline faded, but the responsibility remained. You're a hard man to find, Jace said. I wanted to thank you. You pushed for me to get that tactical role. Without your backing, Vascon would never have listened. You earned it, Torvin replied. Sit. Jace settled into a chair opposite the Champion, for a moment neither spoke. The memory of the arena, the 5 blows. The energy blade, the desperate struggle hung between them like a ghost. "I've been thinking," Torvin said, slowly, "about what you said that hour. Honor was a cage. I hated those words. When you spoke them, now I understand. Them." He flexed his fingers, watching the scales shift. "My entire life I believed I was the best because the rules said so, but the rules were designed by my people for my people. They protected me, and I never saw it. Tradition isn't always bad," Jace said. "It gives people a framework, it holds civilizations together. But when tradition becomes a shield for weakness, it stops being useful and starts being dangerous." "Is that a human philosophy?" "It's a survival philosophy," Jace leaned forward. "My species doesn't have precognitive danger sense or 4 arms, or 1,000 years of martial culture. What we have is the ability to look at a problem and say, what if everything we know about this is wrong? That scares people. It scares me sometimes, but it keeps us alive." Torvin absorbed this in silence. Then he did something that no VI Arabic Farsi Ye Arabic Kaf Arabic Noon of his status had ever done for an outsider. He extended a hand in the human gesture of accord. "I would be honored to learn more, not just fighting, thinking if you are willing." Jace grasped the offered hand. "Deal. But fair warning, human training methods are not gentle on the ego." A rare sound escaped Torvin's throat. Deep rumbling chuckle. "My ego has already been dismantled. There is nothing left to protect." The door chimed again, and Voskan entered, his scarred face grim. "Apologies for interrupting. A situation is developing. The council has finished their deliberations on the arena duel." Jace tensed, and the VI Arabic Farsi Ye Arabic Kaf Arabic Noon delegation pushed for severe sanctions against Earth. They argued your pre-signal attack constituted a war crime under Allied races martial code. Voskan's tail lashed, but the events at Deneb changed the math. Too many species saw what your tactics accomplished. The vote deadlocked. In the end, the council issued a formal reprimand, but no penalties. They also— He paused, something like amusement flickering in his golden eyes. "They also formally amended the rules of sanctioned duels. The combat period now begins the moment both fighters enter the ring. The invocation is ceremonial only." Jace blinked. "They changed the rules because of me." "Because you exposed a flaw," Torrin said. "And the galaxy is better for it, though. I suspect my fellow Viacans will grumble about the human amendment for decades." The 3 of them shared a look. Warrior commander and the outsider who had rewritten the rules. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled slowly, and somewhere among them, humanity's future had shifted from uncertain to something far more interesting. Part 7. 6 months later, the joint training facility on Viacan Prime was a sprawling complex of arenas, simulation chambers, and lecture halls. It had been hastily constructed after the Battle of Deneb, funded by the Viacan Dominion and staffed by a rotating cadre of human special forces instructors. The program was officially called the Cross-Species Tactical Exchange, but everyone just called it the Harlan Vow Initiative. Jace walked through the main courtyard. A datapad tucked his uniform, bearing the insignia of a newly promoted captain. The morning sun of Viacan Prime cast Long shadows across the training grounds. In the nearest arena, a mixed group of Viacan warriors and human soldiers were sparring, their movements fast and fluid. The Viacans had learned to feint, to fight dirty, to use the environment. The humans had picked up some of the Viacans' body-reading techniques, sharpening their own reflexes. Neither species was the same as before. Torvin stood at the edge of the arena, observing. His scales had regained their luster and his stance was relaxed but alert. He had spent months in human-style physical therapy and combat, retraining, rebuilding his body and his mindset from the ground up. He was still the most dangerous Vican warrior alive. But now he was dangerous in ways no Vican had ever been. "You're late," Torvin said without turning. Diplomatic briefing ran long, Jace replied, stopping beside him. "The council is talking about expanding the program. 3 more species have applied for instructor exchanges. The Drevari Bladesingers want to send a delegation. The Zoltic Heavy Infantry want a full battalion trained in human irregular tactics." Torvin made a sound that might have been approval. "Your people have been in the galactic community for less than a decade, and already you are reshaping how everyone thinks about war." "Not just war," Jay said. "Look at them." He nodded toward the sparring pairs, Vicans and humans learning from each other. "A year ago your people thought of us as fragile primitives. Now we're teaching your elite warriors how to be unpredictable. That's more than military cooperation. That's the beginning of something bigger." "An alliance," Torvin said. "A true one. Not built on treaties and trade agreements, but on mutual respect earned in combat and mutual survival," Jace added. "Krell's swarm is regrouping. Intelligence says they're massing for another push. Bigger than Deneb. The council is already asking for joint war plans." Torvin finally turned to face him, his golden eyes, once filled with arrogance and then with shattered pride, now held a calm, steady confidence. "When that fight comes, we will face it together. My people and yours. I have learned much from you, Jace Harlan, but the most important lesson was the first one." "What's that?" "You hit me 5 times before I even realized the fight had begun." Torvin's mouth curved in the Viacan equivalent of a smile. "I have replayed that moment in my mind 1,000 times. The shock, the pain, the sudden understanding that everything I believed about myself was conditional, not absolute. It broke me, and then it rebuilt me." Jace was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a person is to have their cage shattered. That is a very human thing to say." "I know." From the arena a shout went up. One of the Viacan trainees had just executed a perfect leg sweep on her human partner, following up with a submission hold that pinned him cleanly. The human tapped out, laughing, and the Viacan helped him up with a hand that now knew the value of mercy. After victory, the other trainees applauded, human and Viacan alike. Torvin watched the scene, and something in his posture shifted, a release of tension he had carried for years. "They said no one had ever hit me. Now, when young warriors hear that story, they do not see it as my disgrace. They see it as the moment everything changed. The moment we learned that being untouchable is not the same as being strong." Jace clasped his hands behind his back. "And what do you see it as?" Torvin considered the question. "I see it as the first lesson my species was ever taught by yours, and I am grateful. That it hurt. The two of them stood together, watching. The next generation of warriors learned to fight, to adapt, to think beyond the walls their cultures had built. The sun climbed higher in the shadows, shrank, and somewhere in the vast machinery of the galaxy, a new chapter was being written, one in which humanity was no longer a newcomer to be dismissed, but a force that had earned its place through blood, sweat, and the willingness to strike before the signal was given. High above, a Viking cruiser and a Terran destroyer performed a joint orbital patrol, their sensor nets woven together in a pattern no Krell swarm had yet encountered. They moved in perfect synchronization, two species that had learned to trust each other in the hardest way possible. The galaxy was still dangerous, the Krell still hungered, other threats lurked in the dark beyond known space, but humanity was no longer alone, and the Viking dominion was no longer stagnant. The fight had changed everything, and somewhere in the records of the Allied races martial archive, a new entry had been added to the official history of sanctioned duels. It read, Torvin Val vs. Jace Harlan first contact duel, result human victory by yield, notable subject Val sustained 5 strikes prior to formal commencement, ruling combat rules amended, the human amendment. Jace never read the entry. He didn't need to. He had felt the impacts travel up his arm, had seen the shock bloom in Torvin's eyes, had known in that instant that everything would change. The 5 hits were not just punches, they were a declaration, a statement that humanity had arrived and the old ways would never be enough to contain what came next. He looked at Torvin, his former enemy, now his ally and friend, and allowed himself a small private smile. The human had landed 5 before the fight began, and because of that, when the real fight for the galaxy's future started, humanity would not be standing on the sidelines. They would be leading the charge, shoulder to shoulder with those they had once shocked, challenged, and ultimately won over. The story of those 5 hits would be told for generations, but the true victory wasn't the strikes themselves. It was everything that followed: the alliance, the trust, the reluctant respect that bloomed into genuine partnership. That was the real human weapon, not the fist, but the ability to change the rules and then offer a hand to those willing to change with them. The sun reached its zenith over Viking Prime, and the training continued.